Hi, I'm Krista Nunes. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at the Gorilla Foundation. I'm here with Gary Stanley, who is the COO. And today we're interviewing Greg Cummings, who just released a book called Guerrilla Tactics: How to Save a Species.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yeah, we're happy you're here. So let's start with the main question of why did you write the book?
It's something that's been in the back of my mind for years. The career was quite a big chunk of my life, and there was quite a story arc there that I knew I was going to write one day. But I remember when my friend suggested it a couple of years ago, we were sitting around here in Victoria, and he said, "Hey, why don't you write that gorilla story? That's people would love to read that." And my reaction was, do I really want to stick my head into that nest of vipers? And, because it was traumatic for me, that career. I mean, it was fantastic. It had so many high points, and I have so many fond memories.
Mhm.
But when people read the book, they'll see there were so many setbacks. There were so many almost got there situations where we were so close, and I was speaking to a conservationist today, and she said reading that gave her anxiety. She was like, she said she read the book too quickly, and she's going to recommend people take time because it's nonstop. And she said it was exhausting and somewhat stressful to read all these setbacks, and I just keep picking myself up and going on
Yeah,
again.
going forward. And you were always
Yeah.
on the move. You were always going somewhere to help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when I was writing it, I think in my mind, thinking back on those stories, I assumed that they had occurred in, different times at different places. I knew the geographic setting, but I didn't realize they were all on top of each other. So when I'm writing it, I'm thinking, my God, then I went right away and did this. And then when that didn't work, I then did this. And so, yeah, it's, uh, it's surprising for me too to see how rapidly everything went. And it wasn't until I wrote it. And of course, writing it was quite easy. I mean,
Oh,
I did it in 5 months, because like I say, I'd had these memories in my head. And I've been dining out on these stories for so long. I was
mhm.
able to just pick them up and put them down on paper one after the other. And I was shocked at how quickly I was writing it. And it just all came. It was all there because the career was like that. It was just no stop for air, no time to really consider. And as a result, I burned out, which is part of the story.
Also, you said something a minute ago about that career, was as if you had, how many careers have you had?
Well, since then, I went off to be more of a safari guide than a conservationist, although conservation was still very much in my mind, and I was contributing to it in a more, I would say, commercial way. Getting folks to come out and see gorillas using my knowledge of the thing. And I did that for about 7 years, 7 or 8 years in Africa before started writing, started writing books, and I wrote two fiction books, both of them set in Africa. They didn't really do that well, but I had decided by that point that writing was going to be the main thrust of what I do. But having written this now, I do feel, and some of the interviews I've done lately, I really do feel like the conservation fold is calling me back in, or I never really left. I mean, it's something in your heart, it's how you feel about endangered species, and you know, thank goodness I learned some practical things and you can do to actually save them. So in that respect, I feel like I have an obligation to tell this story. But as I'm telling it, I really feel myself being drawn back into conservation for sure.
You referred to yourself as a gorilla guy, so I think that's something that you'll always be. So perhaps you
Yeah.
are pulled back in. Yeah.
From my reading of the book, you also kind of come out as like a modern day Tarzan,
Right.
when somebody
Yeah,
who's lived in both worlds.
Yeah.
absolutely. I think no, I felt that way at times. I could like Lord Greystoke going back to the bush and knocking heads with the lions and the other beasts, because I'd been there as a babe. I left Canada when I was 4 years old, and I didn't, I didn't know that it wasn't normal to be surrounded by wildlife, to be surrounded by, Nairobi, where we lived. They had a game park in the middle of the city, and we were out there at dawn seeing lions with their wildebeest kill. And, I was an infant and I was seeing these things, and that planted such a powerful seed in me. But I also ended up sort of taking it all for granted. And when I became an adult and realized all these things were threatened, that really, it was a shock. I think because of the coming at it from the inside, growing up. And but that knowledge of Africa really served me well when I went back and understood, you could tell the difference between a real problem and maybe a short-term problem. You could tell the difference between the people you can trust and the people who are going to try and scam you. It's that kind of history in Africa really helped me to be calmer about what we were trying to do. And we put a long timeline on what we were trying to achieve. I think that was another way in which we felt confident about how we were succeeding. A lot of people put too short a timeline on making a social change, and you really have to say, well, how long is this problem going to take? And so we said, okay, 30 years. And let's wait until 30 years is over, and then we'll see. And in 20 years, we saw the gorilla population grow. I mean, it was an all-time low when we started this job. And when I say we, I'm generally referring to my co-director Jillian Miller, who I was married to for 20 years, and it's now my ex. But we worked really closely on this together. So we saw the solution in making it long term, but because that we set our sights so far, we got to that place quicker than our anticipation. So it's like Tony Robbins says, turn your anticipation into expectation.
But you said grow, and obviously you're referring to the mountain gorilla population.
Yes.
Which you were particularly focused on with Fosse Fund. But what about the other gorillas, which are much more numerous and much more threatened right now? What did you get involved with? How do you feel about that?
It's a different creature when you're dealing with the Western Lowland and even the Growers gorillas, now known as the Eastern gorillas. They're much widely dispersed, much more widely dispersed in various different habitats. They're threatened by different cultures. So the farther west you go, the more likely you're going to find bushmeat as a problem.
Right.
Whereas the further east you are, the less likely, there's more likely that's a taboo to be eating primates. So you've got all this culture, and across the whole Congo basin, those lowlands are in so many different situations. Now, thankfully, and we've heard recently in more accurate censuses that their numbers are not as low as we thought, but they are still, as you say, more threatened than mountain gorillas, not least of all because of the logistics involved. I mean, mountain gorillas are conveniently in two island habitats that you can manage and oversee and focus on more easily than you can across the whole Congo basin. And you need a joined up policy that works well. And, even though we had 3 countries working, because the habitat ranges across three countries, which created logistical problems. We did overcome them by the fact that it was a small area, and it was not a huge number of people we had to convince to get on board with the idea.
Are you familiar with the work that the Aspinall Foundation is doing in the Congo with their
Damien,
rewilding program? And they have a 1 million acre reserve national park. What do you think of that project?
I was more skeptical to begin with, like a lot of other conservationists, when Damien suggested relocating, captive gorillas into the wild. We sensed that there would be all kinds of flaws with that. but he was the first person to do it, and he
Yeah.
pioneered a lot of information. The data we now have as a result of that effort is really, valuable. It lets us know, well, can it be done? And it can be done on some level. So I admire him because he was, paddling upriver, and there was no one giving him any kind of support for that idea. And I remember because he asked me about it. It was well before he actually got it organized to do it. It was early days, but that was the conversation we had, what would it take? And now we know. And yeah, I mean, the problem with rewilding animals that have, grown up domestically is, I mean, they relate to you like your pet. They have a psychological bond with you.
Dependence.
Yeah, it's not just dependence, it's also love, right? I mean, they've had you around all the time. You've done nothing but nurture them. And now where are we going? Why aren't you coming with me?
Right.
It can be traumatic. So I mean, that's looking at it from the other perspective. I mean, we've always wanted to see the possibility that captive gorillas could be reintroduced to the wild. But I think the logistics probably at the end of the day are too great. It's too much of a challenge that I don't know that we could achieve it on a larger scale.
Well,
But it gives us hope, I mean, because when I look at the captive populations and I listened to Ian talking about the same subject on your own KokoCast, and it's there's a sense that that they will forever be in those institutions until the institution closes down, because as long as they keep having offspring, those offspring will also be in captivity, and the captivity will go on and on and on. And it's, I mean, even our prisons don't require that your children also serve a prison service.
At least the off exhibit spaces are the spaces where the public can come view the gorillas look nice and naturalistic, but where they spend most of their time behind the scenes is not. It's cement and metal mesh. And at the Cincinnati Zoo, it's all below ground level, or the majority of the bedroom spaces are below ground level. So there's no natural light, and it's and metal, and it just doesn't seem like we're doing right by them.
No, and I don't know that we've addressed the psychological, these are highly intelligent creatures. And the more intelligent they are, the more despairing their captivity must be for them. No matter how nicely you dress it up, if you tell someone they can't leave their house, that's incarceration, and you feel it. It's your freedom taken away. And naturally born wild animals, well, instinctively wild animals, let's say, even if they're born in captivity, will feel a loss for not having that freedom to roam.
Right.
I mean, you look at a gorilla, a mountain gorilla's entire life is spent ranging within a 5-kilometer area, but they have the freedom to go wherever they want in that area, and they're only restricted by the behavior of other gorillas, and so that's their world, that's their natural world, and it's so fantastic to see that. And the captivity is the antithesis to that.
It really is. And you can tell they're bored. They seem bored, and they develop these behaviors that don't exist in free living gorillas. Yeah, it's just not right.
When we had Koko, Michael, and Ndume, we did our best to give them as much autonomy as we could. That was important to us and to them. And because of that, I think we developed closer bonds.
Every species is different, it's every, and within those species, you have individuals that are different and cultures that are different. I mean, the idea that you could say, like when people used to ask me when I was doing the guerrilla work and they were surrounded by warfare, can't you relocate them somewhere, like to Kenya or somewhere? And I thought, okay, first of all, finding the appropriate habitat is a challenge. We don't know why gorillas are in the habitat they're in. We can make assumptions, but we have no scientific proof about why they're there.
Yeah.
So we could get that entirely wrong. There could be some little microcosm in that habitat that makes it essential that there's a balance, right? Secondly, they're highly strung animals. How are they going to react to being relocated? I mean, you have to dart them all, you have to sedate them, you have to then put them in some form of transport and drag them across the country. I mean, you'd lose half the population in that process because, there's infant gorillas will die the minute their mothers die. They're not injured in any way, but the anxiety is so great, and that's the nature of that animal. So, and then what would you have? You'd have gorillas in an exotic, as an exotic species in Kenya. They did that with chimps. They relocated a bunch of chimps to Sweetwaters in Kenya. And they were orphan chimps from various other places, and Jane Goodall was advising them, and they when they brought these chimps in, but chimps are not endemic in Kenya, so they've never been found there except in Sweetwaters. So that you can be too precious about those things if an animal is in need of protection. I understand that. It's a sliding scale, though. You think, well, how Richard Branson wanted to take all the lemurs from Madagascar and put them on a Caribbean island. Well, that is foolhardy, because why are the lemurs there? One of the things that lemurs thrive on is the fact that they've got no predators. Madagascar broke away from mainland Africa before the big cats got on board. And la-di-da, there's the lemurs. So that environment for them, they've triumphed. And their whole legacy as a species is to say, in Madagascar, the primates rule. That gets taken away because of some sort of human, it's context. Everything is so important about having anthropomorphic you have to be from time to time, but it's so satisfying if you can just step into the paws of one of these creatures and see things from their point of view.
We agree. We couldn't agree more. That's what our whole mission has been about.
Yeah.
Seeing
No, and I know, and I think that's why Koko was so special, is we got an opportunity to go into the mind and to communicate, with another great ape. And when you talk about her enclosure, I mean, I saw her enclosure, it was fantastic, and she was a working ambassador to the species. She had good digs that
I would say
reflected that.
playing rather than working.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. Right.
She enjoyed all those encounters and all those cats.
I was wondering, when you've visited gorillas many times, and have you noticed the type of communication they have with each other? Can you describe what you've seen?
Well, I've been reading stuff recently that surprised me, because there's a lot more communication going on than is obvious. I mean, when you sit with them, they're looking at each other constantly, and there's lots of eyebrow raising and mouth movements. But I just assumed that was them, twitching. I didn't realize that's actually them talking to each other and calming each other down and reestablishing social ties and so on. What I have noticed in the years I've been going there is that they're much more placid when you go to visit them. And, this is the trade-off in their habitat. We have habituated them to human visitors, which was essential for their survival. There's no way we could expect the Rwandese or the Congolese or the Ugandans to make this species survival a priority if they weren't allowed to earn a dime off them. So that exchange was important, and it really brought out, the value of saving the species, because now gorilla tourism brings in something like $40 million. But in the process, I've seen them become more docile. I haven't experienced a gorilla charging at me in over a decade. So I mean, it's nice. They've calmed down. They're cool. Here come the bald apes again.
Yeah.
Well, this is good. This is an hour distraction in our otherwise boring day. It's a mutual exchange. When you meet the gorillas, you can see they're like, "Oh, great, you've arrived. We were expecting you." And you're like, hey, there you are. And you have that. And it's all through the eyes and communicating with them, that deep cognizant gaze that you get from a gorilla. I mean, my dog never looked at me that way. And he looked at me with some beautiful looks, but just
Yeah.
that look like they're studying you, like, they're trying to think about what you're thinking.
Yeah,
And that's,
recognition. Yeah,
yeah.
just
And
like
that deep exchange is phenomenal, and very flattering as well, because there's the animal,
yeah,
checking you out. You're making an impression on them in their wilderness, in their wild world. They're looking at you, and you are the subject, the focus of their attention right now, and that's so flattering. Of course,
yeah,
the silverback, it does everything in his power to avoid even acknowledging you're there. He'll look everywhere but you. It's like you're there. He'll look over here, look over there, look up beyond you, look down there, because you're something of a threat. And he notices all the other gorillas are a bit charmed by you. So, it's he's looking at you from the side, making sure you know the etiquette. And
Which
the
is,
etiquette with gorillas is just let the boss know he's boss.
how do you think silverbacks do in zoos where they can't really command the audience?
mm,
No, that's tough. I mentioned in my book when I went to Belfast Zoo, the silverback there in captivity was ferocious. I was given a tour by the director of the zoo, and this guy knew the director was the director, and he was a threat to his hierarchical position. And he would slam against the plexiglass. I mean, he's super hard, coming to charge, bang. And John Stone was there saying, yeah, no, he does this all the time, because he doesn't like the fact that I'm the director. Like, oh, poor guy. But yeah, they do demonstrate a lot in captivity, and they've got no way to express it. I
right.
heard there was one night I was at Windy. I was staying in the Gorilla Forest Camp, which is a beautiful, beautiful lodge, and it's almost in the forest with the gorillas. It's not quite. It's right on the edge of the park, but because you're in a valley, and this lodge goes up one side of the valley, the gorillas are on the other side. And it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I was sitting having a nightcap with Jillian, and we were just listening to night sounds, and we heard the unmistakable sound of chest beating
Mhm.
at 10 o'clock at night. You're kidding me. And it was two silverbacks, probably 100 meters apart. And it was a kind of, it was a one-upmanship thing. There was, every time there was a it was, oh yeah,
Had
another
to
one
do it
from
back.
over there, and then another, and they had to do it back, and it went on for like 45 minutes. Each one wanted to have the last word, but it was funny. But that was gorillas in their habitat at night, communicating with each other, and it was
Yeah,
just splendid. It was so superb to hear that.
yeah,
You know, one of the things we have to ask you about is you were there in the early days when the wars um, were burning. And somehow I remember speaking with Dieter Stecklitz about this when they first went back to Karasoke, and they were so all surprised that the guerrillas had mostly survived. So do you think that guerrillas today, in that neck of the woods, have PTSD as a result of that? They seem to have overcome it pretty well.
It's a good question. Definitely, we didn't think in the early days they would survive. I mean, especially when Rwanda blew up in '94 with the genocide, that was like, okay, this is the death knell. And we sat in the corner shaking, wondering what was going to happen, because we were powerless to do anything else. And ironically, in that 100 days of killing in Rwanda, we lost only one gorilla, and that was she died of
wow.
old age. So how much trauma they felt in the forest as a result. I mean, we used to talk about whether the gorillas responded to gunfire, in those
Yeah,
early days. And it was Dieter I was talking to, actually. And he told me, he said, yeah, he said, they're pretty used to the AK-47 fire. So they don't even flinch when they hear pop, 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 pop in the valley, pop, 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 pop. He said, but when they hear incoming mortars, then they scatter.
Yeah.
I thought, wow. So they've already adjusted themselves to wartime, you know. No, don't worry about that. That's just AK. And it just, oh, here comes a missile. Run.
Wow.
And he said, and they would run. And he actually told me this one time, I think it was his wife, Natsine, who was with them. And there was more incoming mortar, and the guerrillas started to scatter, and Natsine didn't follow them, and they stopped, turned around, and brought her, like they came back for her.
Wow.
Like, why aren't you running with us? And it's not in my book because it's a very vague memory, but I'm pretty sure it was Dieter who told me that story. And yeah, it was, you know, they just at moments like that, you're like, wow, this is a species like no other.
Yeah.
Deserves to be saved. And you said you're being pulled back to it. So you tell us more about that. In what way? Are you have any some definite plans for doing something?
Actual plans? No. I'm hoping the book will stir up some safari clients for me, because, you know, flying to Africa and traveling through the wilderness is a pretty pricey business. And I don't mind making no money off it, but I certainly don't want to be out of pocket. And
Right.
so, you know, the last few times I've been to Africa, it just keeps going up in price. And since the pandemic, things are much more expensive. All the national parks have gone up. But you know, I feel comfortable there. I still got energy. I'm getting old, but I can still get up those mountains again, and I love it. So yeah, I'd love to get back. Maybe there's some documentaries that'll come up as a result of the book, and someone will want to take me out there. I'm hoping for that as well. There's a lot of convergence in the future, I feel, as a result of the book, because that's me reviving something I put on the shelf, you know, 10 years ago. I purposely sidestepped the career, the people involved, and everything, and got out of it and disappeared into the African jungle, really. And that didn't go so well, but that's my next memoir. That's and yeah, that's the sequel to Guerrilla Tactics. What happened next? But so I've come this long route, and you know, I remarried. I have a wonderful Sicilian wife, and she's revitalized my whole view on the world. And we met in Africa. We both love Africa. She's not seen gorillas yet, so I at least have to take her back.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I can see a whole revival coming. You know, plus I have this knowledge, and the knowledge, you know, I feel obliged to pass it on.
So that leads me to one of our questions here. What do you think are the 3 biggest lessons people could take away from your book?
Okay. First one, you don't have to be a scientist to get involved in conservation. And even as a fundraiser, I was a self-taught fundraiser. I learned that skill, and over the course of, you know, a few months of really, you know, really giving all the knowledge I could possibly. I got all the books, I read all the stuff. I learned it. I got it. I had the personality for it, but then I got the mechanics of it filled out pretty quick. And I applied it, and conservation needs that. It needs people who have a different view. I mean, yes, the scientists who understand the species and are giving us the hard data about them are crucial. And a lot of them are involved in conservation. How could they not? And once they see what's happening to the species they're out there studying, you kind of wonder about those who don't, you know, care about them, just do their study, get their degree, and walk away. But I think these days, so many people are being drawn into this sector. So there's that. You know, I'm a dilettante in that respect, and but you know, I did a pretty good job of it. And I guess I'd also like people to consider burnout and to not go too long. Think about, look for the signs, when it stops being about the cause and starts being about you. That's
Okay.
what happened to me, and I I lost sight of what I was doing. But that's because I'd done it too long. If I'd taken a couple of years off and then gone back to it, I would have been refreshed. I'd probably still be doing it now. I'd still be in that job now. But also, I was married to my co-director, and there were inherent problems in that we should have seen coming. Um, and so when I left the organization, I also left the marriage, which you avoid that one, folks, at all costs. Don't marry your job. But so that's two, avoid burnout. The other one is, I guess, I had a good time. I always, I think I put some fun into it, but also I want to inspire people. This woman who interviewed me today was talking about how moved she was by my book, and that surprised me. I wrote a book, boom, bang, bang. I wrote it, got it out there. There he is. There's the book. Okay. My expectations are really low, not least because I'd written two other books and they didn't do so well. And I was a big baby about it at the time. And more fool me. This time I thought, I'm not going to be a baby. I'm just going to let the book get out there, and I'm going to reduce everything I expect it to be. And so now it's pleasantly surprising because things are unfolding and people are telling me they're inspired by it. And I did not see that coming. I didn't
Yeah.
feel that it would be that way. But I suppose, if I think about it, why wouldn't it be? It's a career that involved a lot of passion, a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of really great high points and some real low points. And yeah.
What made you feel ready to, after 10 years, to bring it back out and write the book?
I think it's like writing a book frees you from the emotional ties you have to something.
Mhm.
And those, I don't think I realized how emotionally traumatized, or how traumatized I was by that career, and had stepping away from it, and how I had got as far away from it as I could in a way. Certainly, from the NGOs and that whole bear pit of people fighting each other for the minuscule amount of funds available. I remember
Yeah.
hearing someone telling me, "Oh, you think gorillas are bad? You should go to a lion meeting. It ends in fist fights." I'm like, really? So I was happy to get away. So now that I'm older and I've recovered, I can distance myself and smile about it, and it's easier to talk about it, and it was easier to tell the story, so it's easier. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
more
I guess,
perspective. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
About the politics, that seems to be probably one of the hardest things to endure. You're trying to save a species, and everyone's fighting for their share of the pie, and the gorillas kind of seem to get left out.
Yeah, it's insidious that happens. It's
Mhm.
it's dreadful, but I understand why it
Suggestions.
happens. It's like everybody's got a nice boat they've made themselves, and we're all trying to fit on a canal that doesn't have room. And it's
Yeah.
like, you want to show off this thing you've got, and you want it to move, you want it to go, but everyone's crammed into too small a space with the same thing. And that's difficult, and it creates tension. But it's also an attitude. I mean,
Yeah.
we fell out with our sister charity in the US, which I describe in great detail in this
Yeah.
book. Yeah. And but the other guerrilla organizations I got along really well with, because but that's also understandable. We were so close. We saw each other, warts and all, as the sister charities. We'd been to so many meetings together. We had become divided, um, and we became entrenched, kind of like American politics today. We became entrenched in our views, and there wasn't a lot of give and take. And then in the end, it was inevitable that we would split, find a way to actually have a divorce. Because up until then, it was fine. We kind of drifted apart. Okay, we've got two different ethos here. The UK fund is more into the communities. The US fund is more into the science. That's cool. That's compatible. And we spent a few years just avoiding each other, but not backstabbing each other, just working together. And that was largely Dieter Steckless. I mean, he was a sensible guy. And it does come down to personalities. And so it depends on who's running it,
Yeah.
And if you got a bad egg or someone who's got an axe to grind, heading up an organization, then it can be hell for anyone in their way. But I was guilty of that too. I don't claim to be above it. I mean, I look back and think of how there's so much infighting.
There aren't that
terrible.
many guerrilla organizations. I mean, so there are only a few, really. There are
Yeah.
organizations that include guerrillas,
Mm.
so probably easier to work with them. But when you're an organization that's just about guerrillas, you feel like you're competing for the same funds with each other. And
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I definitely got along with organizations who had other wildlife on their agenda, right? Because there wasn't so much vested in it, like you're saying. That was a key part of it too. It was all or nothing with the guerrillas for us, So yeah.
What is your perspective on the future of gorillas? And now that we're here today, and not just mountain gorillas, but the whole species, do you think they'll ever be removed from the endangered species list? And if so, how long will it take and how?
Well, the mountain gorillas have been taken off the critically endangered list and are now on the endangered list. All the western and easterns are still endangered. I think the eastern are still critically endangered. And we were talking about that earlier. They're spread out. It's harder to manage that. The big threat is and what gets done with the Congo Basin. It's the same as with the Amazon. The world is requiring these lungs to stay intact.
Right.
But you've got poor populations living next to them who are making poor choices because we're not creating a context in which they can make the right choices. Let's be honest. It's a give and take thing. And I thought the carbon credits were a good idea to begin with, but I don't think that's working so well. People are tending to, they're just dealing in carbon credits so that they can get away with it. Here, have a bunch of my carbon credits so you can do that. And, it's that, I don't know if that's the best solution. But for those lowlands in the Congo Basin, do they have a future? I'd like to think so, but I'm an eternal optimist. I've often been criticized for being optimistic. I don't see why they can't. I don't see why it can't be symbiotic between the humans and I mean, gorillas and humans don't share the same habitat. It's not like elephants. We chop down the forest, but they're not of much use when we do. The big threat would be a peat exploitation or any more oil exploitation in the basin by Congo. But this is a very poor country, and we hardly ever think about them until they start threatening to drill for oil in endangered habitats. Otherwise, they're they're out of our minds. We don't even think about them. So how much can we expect Congolese people to follow that, to take on those priorities if we don't much care about them?
Right.
And so the world needs to get together more, and technology allows us to do that. And it gets smaller and smaller, the proverbial global village in some ways. But recent years, we seem to be going backwards in terms of our political choices and so on. And meanwhile, the climate crisis is spiraling out of control. So it's easy, and most of my friends are pessimistic. And I think most people involved who are looking at the hard science are going to be pessimistic. It's hard to be optimistic. Maybe turn away from the science for a minute and just go with your heart.
If something's important enough, you have to be an optimist. or you might as well be in another field. And we're optimistic too. We're taking a different approach, but we don't want to stand alone anymore. We're reaching out to partners. Part of the puzzle we do, I believe, is the empathy part.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't think science is enough. It can never be enough. Facts won't look at, I mean, just look at what's happening in politics. Nobody even agrees on the facts. Look at what happened with vaccination. So you got to combine that with the emotional component, and that's where we have a really good hand. So we're taking our 5 decades of data and we're pulling it out and we're translating and interpreting and grabbing thousands of hours of video. You can do a lot with that with the right production team.
Absolutely. No,
And
more
we're in
power to
Africa.
you.
And we're in Africa now with some Ugandans and with some Cameroonians, and having them test the new app we developed, the Koko Signs app.
Mm-hmm.
And we already have some preliminary results where we have villagers saying, you know, people are not going to be able to hunt and kill gorillas if they see this, because for the first time, they can see the videos of Koko, Michael and Ndume on their phones. They didn't have phones before. And so they would just see these photos, and they're not very believable, credible. Yeah, but now they think they're pretty much like us. I don't think it's a good idea to kill them. I feel like a murderer when I do that. And
That's great stuff, man. That's right. That's at the coal face, and where it's needed. Education. You know, I mean, if someone was to ask me, what do you think is the most effective environmental organization in terms of practical outcome for small investment, I would say it's the wildlife clubs of Africa. I haven't met a conservationist working in Africa, an African conservationist, who didn't start out in those clubs, who, you know, coming to their schools. They would go just one Saturday a month maybe and all sit around and go out into the forest, collect stuff, figure out what it was, have a whole, you know, and kids and the real conservationists emerged in that. They were like, I can't get enough of this. And and they're the powerful voices now, like Paula Kahumba, who's Kenya's leading spokesperson for wildlife. She's phenomenal. She came up through wildlife clubs herself, and, you know, as a kid. And so that kind of very direct education, relatable education, like your Koko app, like showing them gorilla signing, communicating. And you're right. How can you hunt an animal that you know is talking to you?
I wanted to see what Greg thought about the idea of using more videos, having virtual ecotourism experiences, because you can only bring so many people in your safaris actually to the continent, but you have an unlimited number of people that can come visit them up close. If some of the guides like you had, you know, GoPro cameras recording their close encounters, like we did with Koko.
This is something I've explored quite a lot myself, as a safari guide. Yeah. I worked with this guy, a South African guy who was he was developing long-lasting batteries, like for the bush. And he came up with this idea that we would put several cameras in the gorilla habitat in various locations. They would have these long life batteries. I mean, basically they last for years. They use them in train lines and everything. They're made from zinc. Because, you know, old train switches and things like that, they stay running and operating off these batteries forever. So this guy was trying to push this idea, and I was doing my safaris. We teamed up and we said, all right, so we came up with this project called Gorilla Cams, and it was going to do just that. It would have been an app you have on your phone, tap in, see what Nukuringo group is doing today. So it was like, of course, I talked about it with Uganda Wildlife, and they said, well, we'd have to make sure, you know, only the rangers know exactly where these cameras are. Their location has to be disguised, you know, so that poachers don't tap into this as a resource for them rather than something.
It's a good anti-poaching tool too.
It is. You know, you can see where people are invading the area, and there are other ways to do that as well that are quite innovative.
Having the tour guides, the people that bring a group, small group to meet mountain gorillas, camera is being held by that person, is on that person's head. So you're seeing what these tourists see without having to go there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I think that's an update. I mean, I was working on this 10 years ago, and it makes more sense to have a guide with a GoPro, taking someone. It's moving, it's active, it's not static. This was sort of like camera trap ideas. You know, you'd have one camera here, one camera there, one camera there, but
Yeah.
it's much more interesting if the camera is not static like that and it's moving.
But
So
you
yeah,
need
I
an
think,
entrepreneur to create a business around it and
oh
invest.
yeah.
We've never, explored that really, but you would create an app and you'd have people subscribing to it, and a portion of
Mhm.
the proceeds would go to the local community. And we're going to continue designing this to make it optimal for gorillas and for gorilla introductions. And we'll be
Mhm.
talking more and more, and we'll talk to you more about this as we go.
Mhm.
And we may even be approaching some of the same people you approached in the past.
I want to ask one more about something he had in the book, was about the Coltan issue with phones and electronics, which you were
Mhm.
helping to work on so long ago, and it now still seems to be an issue. Can you explain what's happening there now?
Yeah, it's still an issue because in the Congo, coltan is mined by artisanal miners. It's alluvial deposits. Everywhere else it's found in the world, you have to have heavy duty machinery to mine it, like in Australia. I mean, Australia provides 60% of the world's coltan, so they're a big source. And there's no poor little farmers digging with their hands in Australia to get this stuff. It's a much more ethical place to source it from. But as I talk about in the book, we were torn. We certainly wanted this opportunity to trickle down as a positive thing for the communities around the
Yeah.
gorillas, and we struggled to make that happen. I don't know that I think that was a bit of a leap of faith. But again, it came down to insecurity. Those same wars are still going on. Every time I turn on the news and Congo's back in with M23 rebels and Rwanda stoking the fires, I think, God, really still? It's
Oh
it's
yeah.
like it's like it's a festering part of Africa. It's probably always going to be, like Palestine. It's going to have this inherent insecurity that's never solved. And that's a problem for gorillas. I mean, mountain gorillas, despite all that, we triumphed. But most of the rest of the gorillas are living in the Congo Basin. Thankfully, they're in other countries like Republic of Congo, and I don't. They're in Cameroon as well. They're in Gabon, and they're in some parts of Angola. I think just a little smidgen of Angola in the northern section. So they have Ian's the best source for that kind of detail.
Mhm.
So they range across all these countries, but Congo, Democratic Republic Congo, is the worst. I don't think it's as pressing an issue in terms of gorilla conservation. We did manage to turn people's attitudes around there at the coalface.
Mhm.
We had that multidisciplinary committee, the Durban process, and its greatest success was getting the message back to people who hadn't heard anything about the gorillas, really. They were in there mining, weren't aware that they were being so destructive. But when the people involved in the trade came to them and said, this is not right, we can't do this, we've got to
Yeah.
stop, that made a difference. It wasn't the usual people telling them, with the ones, who are always carrying a banner for that issue. It was the people who they least expected to hear say, we've got to stop invading the park and threatening the survival of these gorillas. Boom, that turned the situation around. But to say it's completely solved, I don't know. I haven't really gone back and looked at the actual statistics on that issue lately.
Okay. I know whenever I'm at a zoo, there's usually a place to donate your old cell phone, and they have something explaining what it's for to help gorillas in the wild and coltan mining.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, all those metals, those heavy metals in the phone, you know, they're mined in a number of exotic places, and it's the same thing. It's the same issue. Yes, there's the coltan, but there's a lot of other ones as well. And we have to be aware of the, you know, it was funny because when it came to coltan, here I'd been the darling of the tech revolution as the conservationist guy. I was knocking on all the doors, and you know, they were posing with pictures of it's Greg, it's Gorilla Greg. And then Coltan came along, and I went back to those same people. I said, hey, you know, it's your technology that's threatening them. Boom, all the doors closed, windows shut. They had nothing more to say about it. And because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all these were really salutary lessons for me in understanding how to campaign for something, you know, because that, I mean, there was a lot of resistance to our Durban process. That first meeting in Durban, there were people telling, you know, there NGOs who shall remain nameless, urging the Congolese delegates that we'd invited not to go, to boycott the meeting because we were sitting down with rebels and coltan miners and talking to them, and they wanted these people to be sanctioned. They wanted a total ban. They wanted companies to pay for their involvement in this insidious mining activity. And you know, that shuts down everybody. You
Right.
can't get anywhere. No door is going to open when you come with that attitude. Yes, activists are important and advocates are important. But if you want to win everybody over, you've really got to see it from their point of view as well. And companies have, you know, profit margins they have to think about. So when I wrote to the people in the tantalum business and said, hey, we want to work with you, I got a lot of responses because they said, you know, they said, this is refreshing. We never get approached like this. And they came on board and they worked with us and they provided funding for us. And we were all on the same page. It was an amazing process, really. And it taught me a lot about how to campaign effectively.
That anecdote you just shared about bringing people together and not excluding one group,
Yeah.
but having everyone there together and working together to solve the problem. I mean, that's an important message to get out there. So do you have like one piece of advice for effective fundraising you could share, or your number one tip?
Yeah, the number one tip is really understand who you're going to approach. If you come across like you have no idea what their world is about, that you've got this great cause and you're passionate about it, and you're banging on their door and you want their attention, but you haven't taken the time to understand what they're dealing with. You know, it takes a couple of hours to sit down and do it as close to your encounter with this person as possible, because you never know what's hit their decks recently. And, you know, if they're high profile enough, they're all over the news and you can see what's happening with them. And that's really important, understanding what they're dealing with. And then you can shape your ask towards solving a problem that they're trying to solve. And that's key. I mean, you make it seem like it fits in with their whole agenda. And I think too often people blanket mail people, you know, it's like, all right, let's get this out. Let's hit as many people as we can because there's going to be success in numbers. And there will be, but you're going to miss a lot of opportunities if you don't take the time to you know, to know who you're writing to. You know, there's so many things that are important in that respect. And so I spent a lot of time, I loved research, and I spent a lot of time research. And I remember my stepdaughter used to say, well, you obsess, you don't just research, you become so involved in this. Like when Pink Floyd were just becoming supporters of ours. I played so much Pink Floyd music. I watched Pink Floyd. It's just Pink Floyd, you know. When Michael Crichton was considering giving us a donation, read all his books, watched all his movies, you know, and my stepdaughter was like, whoa. But it was part of the process. It was so that I could express some passion about their passion. You know? And that's where you make the connection. And people, people like doing business with people they like.
Mhm.
And so if you come across as being wholly, focused on your cause and kind of selfish about what other people are doing, then they might not connect with you. And another thing, I think I talk about this in my book. There's a difference in fundraising in the US and fundraising in Europe. And in Britain, in Europe in particular. In fact, in Europe is divided by North and South. If you're fundraising in Northern Europe, don't worry, there's lots of foundations. There's a sort of Protestant ethic that led to a separation of state and charities. Whereas when you get, or church and charities, and when you get down to the Mediterranean, it's still very much involved with the church, and people expect the church to take care of these social issues. So it was really interesting working with emerging NGOs in Italy, like wildlife NGOs in Italy in the 90s as well, because they were of a hunting mentality, and like the Spanish are, they just catch all the birds coming south, boom, boom, boom. So there you can see these big transitions, but trying to fundraise there was a completely different. I mean, I never had any success trying to fundraise in Italy because it's very much a who you know connection. It's the people will help you out. It's not like you go out and you cold call. You can do that, to a certain extent. I had some extraordinary success with cold calling. Leonardo DiCaprio became involved as a result of a cold mailing. I got his name. I just grabbed the Forbes list after our lunch with the Beatles fell through. I went up to the top of the hill, cried my eyes out, got the Forbes list, just got as many addresses off the list as I could. And DiCaprio was on the list. He was an up and coming actor, and it was the entertainment, and I found his address. I found a bunch of other addresses, wrote to them all. They must have numbered maybe 100 in the end that I sent out those letters. So it was such early days, and he was so impulsive. I loved them. I thought, this guy's just breaking out.
Were you the one that introduced him to Koko and suggested that he come visit?
Yeah. Well, actually, no, it was his suggestion. Let me tell you how that happened.
Yeah.
We invited him to come to our 100th anniversary Discovery of Gorillas event at the Royal Opera House, and it was the same day as his birthday. And he said, I can't make that. I'm going to be in Aspen with my buddies. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you film me meeting Koko? So he came up with the idea, in fact. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
It's good to know.
And then I flew out and went to see his mom in LA, and she said, okay, so you got your film crew lined up? I said, what are you talking about? I said, this is Hollywood. You expect me to find the film crew? She goes, yeah, I know, you're the charity. I'm sure you can find someone for free. He said, you've got the Hollywood star, and I've got to go find the film crew, which I did, which is when Chris Dugan came involved, the guy who came up to Woodside and filmed. And we went in, we were sitting in the office, and he's like, because Ermelin had given them the little bag of all this Titanic stuff to give to Koko. And I talk about that, and he's like, what am I, Titanic boy?
You remember Koko had watched?
Yeah, Koko had watched the movie. Yeah, Penny said that she had watched the movie and was excited about meeting Leonardo. And he was like, well, I'm excited about meeting her too. And then he was like, hat, no hat? What do you think, Greg?
So he wasn't nervous.
He was, but he was cool still, No, he was nervous in the way that someone who loves wildlife would be nervous. He knew this was an experience that he was highly privileged to be having. He didn't, he was quite humble. I thought his whole attitude around it was brilliant.
I don't know whether you noticed this, but when I watch the videos of these introductions, everyone who meets Koko for the first time is nervous. You know, they don't know what to expect. I'm meeting a gorilla. They're so strong. Mr. Rogers was Robin Williams, but within minutes, they melt. They realize she's so gentle who she is.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah,
nice.
I remember being nervous, but I just wanted her to like me. So I was
Yeah, and you're on a cross species date, right? I mean, how do
yeah,
what do you do? What do you say? It's like-
there's no experience there. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, very special.
Never really done much with the celebs outside of their meeting with Koko. We had Robin Williams had an amazing visit, and we had an amazing 5-minute video from that. You've probably seen it. It got like 25 million views.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's fantastic.
We were really sad when he passed away, and so was Koko. But he made Koko happy for the first time in months after her best friend Michael passed away.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
When Fred Rogers came, that was another really special one as well. She,
Oh, I bet.
yeah,
Wow. No, I've seen that footage as well. Yeah, I've seen just a still from it, and it's a real meeting of minds, isn't it?
yeah,
Did you see his documentary? We Be My
Yeah.
with most of the good footage is in there.
Yes, that's right. That's
Yeah.
that's where I saw it. Yeah, fantastic.
You mentioned it's clear that humans have really gotten ourselves in a mess recently over the past, it seems like decade. It's just utter chaos, and people aren't talking to each other, and very few people are optimistic and so forth. Do you think that humans need to save? Do you think that saving gorillas would help humans get out of this funk? Or do you think we have to learn to save ourselves first before we'll be able to save gorillas?
I think having a common cause always helps. Although I thought the pandemic would bring us together in ways that it never did.
Uh-huh.
Because I thought, yeah, here's a global cause that affects you no matter where you are in the world, and you can't turn your back from it. You know, so this is going to engage people and these kind of things. But no, it just created a whole bunch of animosity about having to get
Masks and vaccines.
vaccinated and max and
yeah.
and it just I watched the whole thing and I thought, oh, yeah, is there hope? I think it just depends on. I think that common cause would help. I think there's a way in which you could use that because the last gorilla safari I did, half the clients, because it's quite a big crowd, half the clients were Trump supporters and the other half weren't.
Oh,
But it made no difference to how we spent time with the gorillas, right? It was like, it made no difference to their appreciation, to their open-hearted exposure to this moment in their lives. So, yeah, I think there's something in that for sure. How to organize it to make it work that way, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's important because as much as some of us really want to save another species, a lot of people think that humans are more important, need to be saved first. So we have to show benefits to both. And oftentimes we can show their benefits to kids because as they're introduced to Koko and they light up and they realize you can really talk to the animals and the next generation, they need some faith in the future. And I think that's what it would give them if we could show we can do something decent. And you've probably said this a million times, but it doesn't cost that much to save a species, right?
It doesn't.
Compared to all these other problems we have, like global warming.
well, everything is all connected too, right? We need to
Yeah.
save the environment to save the species,
Yeah.
to save ourselves. So. My last question was, what advice do you have for a young person who wants to become a gorilla conservationist?
Well, know your subject through and through. That really, it really helps. You don't want any sudden surprises about what you got yourself into. And that's one thing I hope my book does is it gives people, because there's been a lot written about the gorillas and their lifestyles and different efforts to save them, but it's been very much focused on the species. And my book takes a step back, looks at the whole thing holistically and says, well, what does go into it? You know, the mechanics of that, of saving a species. So, you know, those are really good books. It's also good to read some of the critical stuff. Don't just read the stuff where everyone's agreeing it's all lovely and sweet.
Yeah.
You know, Weasels Ripped My Flesh is a really good book. And there's a bunch of books worth reading just to get so you're prepared. And no one accuses you of being too optimistic. You know, you know exactly what the facts are. So I think that's advice I would give them. And also just keep going while you've got the energy. Keep going, you know. Put it all in as much as you can, but don't burn out.
Yeah, take a break.
That's a tough one.
Fundraising fatigue is what you called it in your book. Yeah.
Yes, I did. Fundraising fatigue.
Yeah.
You're saying don't give up, but don't burn out either. There's a
Yeah.
way to juggle those two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strike a
Find the
balance.
balance. Yeah. In the balance.
Cool. And make sure to read Greg's book if you're young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's essential. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's essential advice. Read my
Required
book.
reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
This has been great. I think we've covered a lot of territory. It's so nice to be talking to people who, you know what we're talking about, and also to revisit the time with Koko and the circumstances around that. That's been really good fun. So yeah, no, I'm really interested in this project you're working on. Keep me in the loop. If there's any way I
Yeah,
can
we
help,
will.
let me know. And it's been so much fun talking to you guys today. It's really been
Yeah,
good.
thank you. I really appreciate it. It was fun to meet you.
Yeah.